zlatna uja u pleteru izlivena, na rukama omerjana, jidriš, veslaš i smiješ se na valima vremena.
Born on August 18, 1450, in Split, Marko Marulić was a Croatian poet, humanist, moralist, known as the father of Croatian literature. He comes from an honorable noble family, Pečanić. He graduated from a humanist school in Split, but remains unknown where exactly he went to university. However, it is assumed that he was in Padua, Italy. Still, he spent his majority of his life in his hometown working as a lawyer, poet, and religious figure. He was also the core person in Split's humanistic circle. Marulić was a deeply religious and strongly inspired by Christian morals, which is reflected in his work. Nevertheless, it is assumed that he wasn't always like that, which is why two opposing views about his adolescence came about. This is why Marulić's autobiography by Frano Božić Natalis, his early life is described as a promiscuous, while others believe that he had lived an ascetic life from the beginning, and he didn't give into bodily pleasures. Rather than that, he spent his time studying, even at night with a candle by his side.
Today, he is most known by his work Judith. Judith is an important figure in Croatian literature because it was the first artistic epic written in Croatian language. However, during his time, he was more known for his Latin works in which Christian virgilism epics especially stand out, such as Davidiat. De incitione bene vivendi per exempla sanctorum. As a moral lesson in Christian life, we have Evangeliary, which is the foundation of his moral theology. His Latin works brought him international fame, and they were read across Europe by intellectual circles and spiritual leaders. That is why it is known that Marulić's works were read by Ignatius Loyola, Thomas More, and Henrik VIII. Also, Marulić is the first person in Croatian history to translate Dante and Petrarch. At the end of his life, he withdrew from his public life and died in Split on January 5, 1524. Marulić's legacy lives until this day, and his contribution to Croatian literature and culture remains priceless. And in recent times, Croatia is recognized as a prominent representative in Europe's Christian humanist and Renaissance epic. It is interesting to know that there is no portrait of Marulić from his time, so it's not known what he actually looked like. However, his first autobiography writer and friend Frano Božić Natalis described his physical appearance as someone of a medium build, neither fat nor skinny, black-eyed, brown-haired, and with a long beard and eagle-like nose.
Ka brnistra rasvitana nasrid kore okamena u librima žeže gori i vijori, vična slava tvog imena.
The bust of Marko Marulić was created by sculptor Josip Bosnić and placed in the atrium of our school in the year 2000. Our school, located in the center of Split, got its name from the father of Croatian literature, which only further emphasizes his importance and contribution. The bust shows Marulić with his signature serious facial expression, highlighting his intellectual power and literary significance.
Who is Josip Bosnić? Josip Bosnić is a Croatian sculptor, painter, and restaurateur. He was born in Cista Prova in the year 1958. He graduated in arts and art restoration at the University of Split, and during his studies he worked with some famous artists, like Kuzma Kovačić and others. Bosnić is famous for his sacred art. Among his work are sculptures of Blessed Alojzije Stepinac and Peter Josip Marcelić. His style is characterized by precision, a feeling for the composition, and deep spiritual dimension. Other than sculpting, he does the restoration and conservation of works of art and runs the artistic studio St. Luke. He is special to us because he taught arts in our school until he retired.
Rajsku pismu puka tvoj,
Judith is Marulić's character based on an Old Testament from the Bible. Literary historians consider Bible's version to be the first historical moral parable. But who was Judith? She is a brave and God-fearing woman who, with faith in God, designs a wise plan and saves her people from the overpowering enemy. That's how she became the symbol of hope, life, and her country. Marulić started writing his piece during Lent. In his letter addressed to Peter Dujan Baleskravić, he wrote about getting inspired for his book while flipping over the pages of the Book of Old Testament. He himself wrote about choosing the biblical parable which talks of the great widow Judith and overruled Holofernes, so he could point out the importance of faith in Jesus Christ and your own people. The plot of the book takes place in Bethulia, which is trying to defend itself from Holofernes' strong military force when the Assyrian army stopped the water flowing into the city. They decided to wait for God's help, and if God doesn't help them, they will give up after a few days. At the moment, Judith steps in and tells them that they can give God deadlines. She decides to take action, putting the matter of her future of her people in her own hands. She put on her best dress and headed to the enemy territory. She enchanted everybody with her beauty, especially Holofernes, as well as bewitching him with her beauty. She poured wine for him. So once he drunkenly fell asleep, she beheaded him. She brought his head to her people as a symbol of victory. They put his head on a stake and hung it from the city entrance. When Holofernes' army saw his head, they ran away, and Judith was celebrated until the end of her life. It was written in Split Czechoslovakian dialect of Marulić's time and with double rhyming dodecahedron, iconic for the Renaissance in Croatia. That piece marks the beginning of Croatian literature. This is why he earned the name the father of Croatian literature.
Our schoolyard is adorned with a beautiful statue of Marulić's Judith made by academic sculptor Lovre Jakšić. The statue was placed in the schoolyard in the symbolically called Year of Judith, which marked the 500th anniversary since the first printing of the work itself. Thanks to that, the statue always reminds us that even in these demanding, unpredictable, and sometimes difficult times, we do not run from our problems, but we must face them and have courage to make decisions as well as fight for what we believe.
Kad divojka sa maštilom na funtani o života 16 dici točiš sriću da kaži.
On the portal of the first floor, which is the most beautiful part of the house, we can notice decorative frames and prosperously decorated capitals. Crest and lunette is not placed within Gothic shield, but in leafy wreath, which confirms Giorgio's workshop. However, a few of the Split's cultural historians have tried proving that Marko wasn't born in the mentioned house. Namely, as the main reason, they used the initials ZM carved on the sides of the crest of the family Pećanić Marulić. Using those two letters as proof, they claimed that the house couldn't have been owned by Marko or his father Nikola, but by someone whose baptismal name was either Zvane or Zorzi. Other than that, they used Marko's last will and testament, in which he strictly writes that it was written in his new house in a new part of Split. However, this is not strong enough proof to dispute the possibility of Marko being born in Papalićeva Street. Unlike his brothers, Marko was educated outside of Split. He remained unmarried. He didn't start any judicial actions against his cousins because of inheritance. He lived for 74 years. In other words, he didn't have to spend his whole life inside of his birth house. Perhaps with more persistent interdisciplinary investigations, it would be figured out. After all, old people of Split even believed that small beardy portrait inserted in the capital's jamb presents personally the poet of Judita.
Času oganj ili pota. Splite moj, kako zvona svetog doje, cijela zemlja
Marko Marulić was a close friend of the noblemen Dmira and Jeronim Papalić, and they were all members of the humanist circle of Split. However, there is an interesting legend regarding their friendship. In short, two young men, one of which is to become the father of Croatian literature, and the other from the Honorable Papalić family, who won't get to become anyone, from night to night would court one beautiful and alluring lady, the daughter of the Split noble. While one would guard under her window, the other would surrender himself to passion with her. They weren't able to keep their secrets, because one night, while Marulić was impatiently waiting for his friend to come down from the bedroom of the attractive woman, in front of him slammed a bag in which was decapitated Papalić. Horrified by that act, and haunted by the feeling of guilt for his sins he had committed, Marko retreated to a life of loneliness on Šolta, where a frivolous and promiscuous young man became a Christian humanist and writer.
Svetog doje, sila zemlja neka čuje, rajsku pismu puka tvoj, Splite moj, rajsku pismu puka tvoj.
During his lifetime, Marulić practiced law, philosophy, and literature, but he was also a deeply religious man. He practiced law in his hometown and performed many municipal duties: an examiner, investigator with the power to review and certify notary documents, a judge, an executor of wills, a witness to settlements and contracts, a lawsuit representative, and a plaintiff. As a lawyer, he advised nobles and citizens of Split on legal matters, but he refused to actively participate in politics and administration.
Instead, he dedicated his time to writing literary and moral philosophical works with which he strived to shape the ethical values of society. His works often had a moral and religious message. His role in Croatian history was not just literary. As a humanist, Marulić was a part of a group of intellectuals who strived to rebuild the classical values of ancient philosophy and connect them with Christian tradition. He believed that the role of literature was moral improvement of society, which is evident in his works.
To honor his literary influence, a monument to Marko Marulić by a famous sculptor Ivan Meštrović was placed in front of the Malezi Palace on Braća Radić Square in 1925. The statue, made of bronze, depicts a poet immersed in a book. The composition is not accidental, because Meštrović wanted to portray Marulić as a contemplating man, dedicated to literature and philosophy. Meštrović succeeded in showcasing the spirit of a Renaissance man of thought, highlighting his wisdom and determination. Some say that a living descendant of the famous Marulić family posed for Ivan Meštrović. However, according to others, the inspiration was Meštrović's self-portrait. Other than in Croatia, his monument stands in Germany and Chile. The monument is displayed in the square in front of the Malezi Palace, which further emphasizes his connection to Split's cultural heritage. The Malezi Palace, located in close proximity to the Perisil Square and Diocletian's Palace, is a Baroque building from the 17th century. The palace, apart from its architectural significance, serves today as a cultural center where many exhibitions and events are held. The placement of Marulić's monument in front of the Malezi Palace is not accidental. It symbolizes the continuity of Croatia's literary and cultural tradition, linking the Renaissance humanists to later historical eras of Split. Today, the square in front of the Malezi Palace is one of the more important cultural locations in Split. The Marulić monument is a mandatory stop for all those who want to feel the spirit of Split's history and pay tribute to one of the most important Croatian writers.
Kamfora zlatna uja uplete ruke.
From 1509 to 1511, Marko Marulić lived on Šolta, a small island in the Adriatic Sea. Šolta was one of his favorite places to go and ponder, and it is commonly connected with Marulić's life and work because of the peaceful and isolated area. Sources state that he hid away there to enjoy a more peaceful life, and that he spent 2 years studying at the hermit's apartment in St. Peter in Nechuria. But he went back to Split out of fear of pirates. Next to that apartment was a small church of St. Peter, over which Marulić's godfather, Don Dujan Balistrilić, had patronage, and nearby Balistrilić owned a stone house and a country estate with a vegetable garden and an orchard. For Marulić, the stay in Etrium, as shown by the chronology of his works, was filled with intensive literary work. Marulić did not forget about his friends from Split while he was on Šolta. He sent them a Latin epistle written in verses, inviting them to visit him and that he would treat them with a simple but a delicious meal. His presence on Šolta can be considered crucial for his spiritual and literary development because the island offered him distance from his everyday life and gave him a chance for deeper meditation. Even though the information of Marulić's stay on Šolta are scarce, the island remains one of the most important locality for understanding the life and creations of this great Croatian writer.
Marulić, in his work Psychology on the Nature of the Human Soul, originally Psicologia de Razione Anime Humane, was the first in history to ever use the word psychology, so he is considered to be the creator of the word.
The church and monastery of St. Francis, situated on the west side of Riva, were built on an old early Christian site, next to the graven church of St. Felix, martyr from Diocletian's reign. In the 13th century, the church was occupied by little brothers of St. Francis. A Franciscan monastery is right next to the church with a 13th century cloister and a library with around 3,000 books. Some of them even date back to the 16th century. St. Francis Church was restored and upgraded many times. The way it looks today was shaped during Baroque and Neo-Gothic periods, although it retained traces of earlier styles. Graves of reputable citizens of Split can be found in the church and monastery, such as father of Croatian literature Marko Marulić, making it famous as Little Pantheon of Croatian people. Marulić died in Split on the 5th of January of 1524, so he was, according to his will, buried in the church of St. Francis. His grave was simple and it was not standing out compared to the other graves. Tombstone with the family crest was a sign and renewed at the end of the 16th century, and a Latin sign standing on it was put there by his descendants to honor of his teachings and virtues. To our great uncle Marko Marulić, famous for his chaste life, nobility and teachings, and to the most deserving father of the same name, Aleksandar Marulić, and brothers have renewed the monument.
Wieczna slawa Twog imena. Splite moj, kako zvona svetog duje.
This discovery confirms Marulić's significant connection to the monastery at Poljud. In his will, Marulić left part of his rich library to the monastery, including the Bible, the Gospel, and several codices which made up his personal literature. At that time, books were rare and valuable, which further enhances the importance of this inheritance. Other than literary inheritance, Marulić's connection to Poljud is apparent in the fact that the monastery became the eternal resting place for many noble families, including the Marulić family, but not Marulić himself. This proves the monastery's importance in the cultural and spiritual life of Split during the Renaissance. The discovery of Marulić's books in the Poljud monastery brings a precious insight into the intellectual world of this great humanist and further confirms his lasting connection with this Franciscan monastery.
Rajsku pismu puka tvoj, Splite moj. Kad divojka sa maštilom na funtani o života, šesnoj dici to da kažiju cijelem svitu, času oganj i